Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Eden Army podcast. My name is Pete Robertucci. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Look, I'm excited. All right. There's that one guy that you meet where you kind of connect with a little bit, even though if he doesn't connect with you, you kind of connect with him a little bit. And I stalked him one time in St. Petersburg because I just had a book that I'd written and I wanted to go pick this guy's brain. So we're going to get to him in just a little bit. It's exciting. I can't wait. But first, don't forget, guys, remember, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. Russ makes me do this. It's good for the algorithm gods, is what they tell me. So tonight's show is sponsored by me. I'm sponsoring tonight's show because we've got a new T-shirt out. And if you, let me preface. Let me just say this first. This show, for those of you that are watching for the first time, Kick is slamming over there. I don't know how the other platforms are doing, but this show is typically not kid friendly, right? Not safe for work. So we're going to do our best to chill it out while we have the guests, and then we'll get back to normal Pete and Russ antics after Franklin gets tired of us and bails. But tonight's show is brought to you by Eden Army. And the reason we do that is because we got a new T-shirt out, guys. I don't know. If you scan that QR code right up there, you can get your Eden Army, the ATF is gay shirt. So hook that up, check it out. Hopefully we'll have some for mountain readiness. So we should have a bunch there, but we don't know. You can get yours now and wear it to mountain readiness, and that'd be kind of cool. So scan that and make sure you guys do that. Let's talk about our guests for a little bit. And I didn't write this. This is his own words. Franklin Horton lives and writes in the mountains of southwestern Virginia. He started writing at the age of 13 and has written over 30 science fiction and thriller novels. According to him now, he lives as a hermit up in the remote mountaintop along top of the Clinch Mountain chain of mountains, splitting his day between writing and tinkering in his shop, just like one of his characters might do that a lot, the Mad Mick. Horton pursued an English degree at Virginia Commonwealth University, an education he humorously describes as, well, shit, useless, right? If you have any questions for Franklin, make sure you hit hashtag Mick and then your question. And Russ, who's always behind the scenes working his magic, we'll go ahead and make sure we get those questions to him before the end of the show. So before we do any of that, let's pay some bills real quick, and then we're going to bring in Mr. Franklin Horton.
Hey, what's going on? What's fucking happening? Suicide. Nobody alive, motherfucker. Do it. Do it, bro. Easy. Easy, don't.
There you go, guys. Don't forget that class is happening right after Mountain Readiness. I am given a deadline until Monday to fill that thing up. We still have plenty of spots left. For those of you that have already paid, don't worry. If you've already paid and we don't fill the class up or get you a refund, and then maybe we can direct you over to Carl Erickson's class right after Mountain Readiness. That'd be kind of cool. So look, without any further ado, let's bring in my good friend, Mr. Franklin Horton. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. It's good to be here with you.
Excellent. I appreciate having you here. I had mentioned that in the monologue at the beginning that you wanted to be a writer from a very young age, 13, I think, right?
Yeah.
So, we all have idols in whatever genre we're doing, whatever work we're doing. At 13, did you have an idol, a role model that you kind of wanted to model yourself out of a little bit, or at least says, hey, this guy's pretty cool, I want to do this?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because up until that point, I always thought that writers were huge nerds because I didn't know any entertaining writers out there in the world. And then Stephen King comes along, and there's a guy who kind of is living like a rock star. He writes these crazy horror novels, and he's drinking beer and snorting coke and listening to AC/DC and basically living the Ozzy Osbourne life. And I'm like, writers don't have to be nerds. Writers can be fun too. And so that was the first writer that I ever thought was kind of interesting as a person. And my favorite books though were survival books. So I liked Stephen King, and I thought he made writing look like an interesting thing to do. But there were survival books that I was just obsessed with, and that's kind of what sucked me in. There was one called Two Against the North about these two kids who were like 13 years old that got stuck up in the barrens of like the Canadian Arctic and had to survive over the winter by themselves. And that's the kind of stuff that really sucked me in, the life and death stories.
Gotcha. So now, at your young age, you probably didn't see too much success, obviously, at an early age. But is that the genre you wanted to write in? Were you tinkering with that writing style, the survival, the preparedness type of deal, or that was before that kind of hit the market per se?
Well, I didn't have any conception that I could actually write a book. So what I was trying to do at that time was I was writing stories, and I was submitting them to magazines that I read. So like I was submitting stories to Outdoor Life, to Field and Stream, to Boys Life magazine, to all these, and none of them bought any of my stories. And they all probably sucked anyway. I was a 13-year-old kid, and you don't see a lot of 13-year-old kid stories in Outdoor Life, but I was still writing them, and you learn from it. And at least I was kind of, getting my feet wet and learning a little bit about it. But for years, that's all I wrote was short stories, because I never thought that I could actually sit down and write a whole novel length story. It just seemed unimaginable.
That's interesting, because before I decided I was going to write, I entered a writing contest, and it had to do with the life of a first responder during COVID. And I won the contest, but truth be known, I was probably the only one that entered. So I think I got one of your signed books, as a matter of fact, that you had given to one group or another. So once I actually thought that I won that, I'm like, well, maybe there's an avenue here. I can pursue this. So that's kind of cool. Before you hit it big in this writing thing with your Borrowed World series, what kind of work did you do, bud? What were you into?
Oh, I did everything. I was one of those people that was big on adventure. So if I had a job and a cooler job came along, I'm like, hey, I'm going to go do that. So, I delivered furniture. I installed stereos. I worked as a desk clerk in a hotel at the beach. I worked in an antique store. I worked in a 1-hour photo store. I worked in commercial construction for years and years and years. The most consistent, steady job I had was I worked at a state mental health agency in Virginia. And overall, I had like 27 or 28 years in there. But I wasn't a counselor or a therapist. I worked on the more physical side. I managed the buildings, because I had a commercial contractor's license. So I managed construction projects, expansion projects, all this kind of stuff. But it was interesting because you still picked up a lot of crazy stories about people and heard the weird stuff that went on. So it was good material for a writer. But meanwhile, throughout all that, I was still writing in the background.
That's kind of cool. And it's funny that you'd mentioned that, because I noticed we're similar in one aspect, is that I personally love to sit and watch people. If I'm around a campfire or something, typically I'm not the one, telling tall tales about what I used to do as a firefighter paramedic. I like to just sit back and listen to everybody else's story. But do you think that sort of introverted personality helps or hinders an author's success?
Oh, I think it helps very much. I did this little reel on Instagram today where I was talking about when I was young, one of the things that I started doing was I started keeping these notebooks, and I wasn't writing like a diary about myself. I was writing notes about other people. So if I heard some crazy story about something some weird old man in town did, or something some other kid did, or, some family member was telling me a crazy story, I wrote all that stuff down. And at this point, I've got stacks of notebooks, thousands and thousands of pages of weird things that people did, or, crazy stories that somebody told me. And I go back and I dig through those sometimes, because if I'm wanting to create a small character, like even if he's, some fringe character in a book, I want to make him interesting. And one of the ways that I make him interesting is I'll go back and I'll dig through, and I'm like, oh, this is the guy who caught the venereal disease off the sheep, or this is find some little weird story you can put with that guy that'll make him stick in people's head.
That's amazing, because I bought some property up in northern Wisconsin, and it's in the middle of nowhere, but there is a bar there, and it's called the Chit Chat Bar. I love the place, but I'll sit in there and I'll listen to stories of like some of the crazy stuff the old timers did. Well, anyway, long and short, last summer when I was up there, I wrote a book called Birchwood Burning. And one of the characters in there is 100% based on just stories about a certain person that I had learned about in the bar and has come to my property there. And I love that. That's just amazing. You can't make up that kind of stuff. I don't have the ability to do it. Truth is stranger than fiction sometimes, right?
Yeah, and I grew up in the country where we didn't really have cable TV until I was in high school. So when I was growing up, this was the 70s, but people were still living like they did in the 1950s. People on Sundays would go to other people's houses and sit on the porch and talk, and they told stories. So it was very much a storytelling culture. And that kind of instilled in me this whole thing to listen to stories, and that you can learn from stories, and that that's a good way to pass the time. So I collect a lot of that, just weird little fragments of things that people did that that make characters interesting in books.
Gotcha. So I've always loved not just your writing in general, but sometimes your titles of your books. So we're here to talk about the Rotten Belly Society, right?
Yeah.
Tell us the background behind that, so people can kind of get a feel for how Dan actually is and the way of Dan.
Well, a lot of people may have watched the movie Little Big Man back in the 70s that starred Dustin Hoffman. And it was about, well, it's too long to explain the whole movie. But basically, there was a character in Little Big Man who was a Native American who did everything backwards. He bathed in dirt and dried off in water. He rode his horse backwards. And he was a member of the Rotten Belly Society. And this society existed among several tribes of Plains Indians, and they were people who did things backwards to teach you how to do things right. So the parents could always point to the Rotten Belly people and say, that's not how you act. See, look at him. He's all dirty, and he smells bad, and he makes noise when you're supposed to be quiet. And so by misbehaving, they served this role in the tribe that like being the court jester or something. They taught everybody how the proper way to act. And see, Dan is kind of that way. Dan is a character who he smokes weed, he drinks, he's not situationally aware. At times when he should be paying attention, he's more concerned about, I've got this quiet moment here. I think I'll put on my earbuds and smoke some pot, or I'll, mix me up a drink. So we can learn from Dan. He's an entertaining, likable guy, but he is not the kind of switched on role model that you want as far as how to be prepared or situationally aware.
And that's probably why, like we had talked about earlier in the green room, it's probably why I can relate so much to that kind of guy. Guys our age can relate to this, because we've done things in our past we weren't always how we are now. And Dan, you're right. Dan is a perfect example. Russ meshes something back there of how not to do things. So that's really good. So this is book 5 of the series, and this is going to be the final book of the Way of Dan series, yes, which really pisses me off, Franklin. I'll be honest with you, because I love that book. But I've got another bone to pick with you.
Uh-oh.
So I think it was a year or two ago. I'm laying in my bunk at the fire department. I'm listening to one of your books, Kevin Pierce. He puts me to sleep a lot of nights in a good way. And I'm sitting there and I'm waiting for the next call, waiting for the world to come to an end. And Lightspeed calls on a guy in the in his on his staff there named Patrick Robert Tucci. And the bone I have to pick with you is, why do I have to be a nerdy analyst? Why couldn't you make me like a Navy SEAL or even a fat Italian guy that's got some skills or something? So I have a little bone to pick with you about that. How do you come up with these names? Other than picking them off Facebook and stuff like that, apparently.
This is kind of funny, but I have always been cheap. So I go to thrift stores a lot, and I look for bargains at thrift stores. And one of the things I buy at thrift stores is old yearbooks. So I've got a half dozen, 10 old yearbooks sitting here in the office. And sometimes when I need somebody, I'll go through one of those yearbooks and I'll pick a name. And these are old yearbooks, these are 60s and 70s. And I'll even pick the description, a physical description of the guy. So I use old yearbooks, but I also use people I know. And I think it's more fun to make them somebody who, everybody else will get a laugh out of.
Yeah, that's I jumped out of my bunk and I'm like, did I hear that right? I wasn't sure. But that is a genius idea. See, this is why, guys, I seek guys like this out. He knows how to do this stuff. He's got ideas I never had. So I'm sure that you get tired of my questions when we're at expos and stuff like that. And I apologize for that. But honestly, it's an endearing thing because I'm seeking out your knowledge, and I hope I don't bother you all that much when I'm doing
No, actually, one of the things you probably noticed by this point is that I probably give you more information than you're interested in. You're trying to walk away and be polite, and I'm like, no, Pete, come back.
Well, it's rapid fire, and sometimes I have to get my phone out to take notes and stuff, and I'm like,
well, you have taken notes, but that's good.
It is. I love it. It's always good to pick the brains of people that have been there, done that, especially when you're new to, well, hell, anything. I always wanted to surround myself with smarter people than me. That's the way I look at it.
That was my system too. And I mentioned to you several times about the value of going to like a writers conference. And that was one of my goals. Is when I went to a writers conference, I wanted to see people who were doing this better than me. And those people inspired me. They motivated me. And I guess you saw from the one that we attended back in the fall that, you just come out of there with your head spinning.
You do. And I tell you what, you really come out of there motivated. I mean, the next couple of days after I got home, I put a lot of words on the paper just because you're motivated to, first of all, try new things, and then motivated. Look, all these people are sitting down, they're dedicating their time. A lot of them have a system. I'm sure you have a system of when you're writing, when you're not writing, and just applying that. It's a motivating experience. So tell us, what's your system for not only writing, but you do everything mostly by yourself for running this business. What do you have that? Do you have a system involved in all that, like schedule, if you will?
Yeah, it's like a seat of my pants thing because I work long days. I'm like a 60 or 70 hour a week person, which I left my 40-hour a week day job to work twice as much, but at least it's for myself. I'm pretty structured in that I know my brain works best in the morning. Mm-hmm. So I try to get up and be writing by, 6 or 7 in the morning. And I try to get my most productive writing done before noon. And usually I'll take, little breaks to stand up and move around and do things. I take a 2-hour break midday where I'll usually go down to my shop and do stuff. And then I come back and I focus on the business side of it because I don't need the creative brain power to, work on ads, answer emails, answer messages, do the website updates and the swag stuff. So the creative stuff has to be in the morning, the business stuff in the afternoon. And then usually I'm here back in the afternoon till about 8 or 9 o'clock, finalizing everything for the day.
Well, it's working for you because obviously you're successful in what you're doing, not just in the post-apocalyptic genre, but the thriller genre also. Now, but back to post-apocalyptic stuff and preparedness. Were you into that kind of thing before you wrote the Borrowed World series? Let's just it's a certain stigma involved with being called a prepper. But were you into preparedness before the Borrowed World series?
Yeah, I kind of grew up in this thing that it wasn't, it wasn't prepping and all that. In the 70s, it was being survivalist. But if you lived in the country, you kind of grew up with this lifestyle of, if we own something, we have to be able to fix it because there's nobody around here. If your water system goes down, there's nobody to work on it, so you have to fix it yourself. So my dad was one of those people who was like, if you own it, you have to be able to fix it. So we became very self-sufficient in that way. And we all owned guns as kids then, and the thing we did, because we didn't have television, was we came home in the afternoon, you got a gun and a pack, and you'd go out and wander around the woods, and you'd build shelters and you'd build fires and you'd learn to, set little traps and do things like that, just experimenting with stuff that you read about in Outdoor Life magazine or other things like that. But then as I got into high school, I got obsessed with Soldier of Fortune magazine, which, you know, it's funny how many survival and prepper authors were Soldier of Fortune fans. But, that magazine just opened me up to a lot of new stuff. So I went from being, this hillbilly kid to this survivalist kid by the time Soldier of Fortune came in as an influence. Did you ever read that magazine?
Absolutely, of course. Yeah. Guys, I don't know if you noticed, but Franklin's got one of his Mad Mick shirts on right there. And if you scan that QR code up there above my head, it's going to send you right to his website. If you don't buy any of his merchandise, at least sign up for his newsletter. He doesn't put them out very often. He doesn't spam the hell out of you. He just puts them out when there's important things to be said. So scan that QR code above my right shoulder. And at least, if you don't buy any cool swag, at least get signed up for his newsletter. So back to so you were kind of like a hillbilly prepper. All right, you were just doing that. It wasn't really prepping back then. This is kind of how you lived, right? That's just what they did in the mountains and stuff like that.
It was routine then that I knew people who didn't have indoor plumbing, or
Sure.
a lot of the neighbors around us, processed their own beef and pork. So even though we didn't raise livestock, we knew that you went to somebody and got your livestock, that you got your processed meat or whatever. So it was a very rural lifestyle. But when I wrote The Borrowed World, one of the things that I did, especially in that very first book, was I tried to only use weapons and gear that I owned. And that did pretty well for a while until I got, really interested in like expanding to all these cool things that I didn't own, but I eventually wanted to own. Right. And it's been funny because one of the comments you get sometimes is from people who are like, you write about all these people who own crazy things like suppressors and night vision and thermal. And I'm like, well, I only hang out with people that have those things. Right. But I mean, it is that, your friend group tends to expand as you meet people that own interesting weapons and interesting gear. So, I write about those kind of people now because I know so many people that really have those things.
Absolutely. So, and then the stuff that you don't have, obviously, you have to research and find out. Look, because if you tell somebody that if you write in your book that somebody switched to safety off of a Glock, God forbid, you're gonna hear it forever and ever and ever. So, the research aspect of it is kind of interesting to me. Now, what was the one surprising thing while doing all this research for Borrowed World that you've learned? Now, I tell you, like I studied stuff like Kosovo and stuff like that about the human behavior, especially when it comes to like a societal collapse. Did you do any research for that kind of thing? And what was the most surprising aspect of that?
Yeah, I read a lot about that because I had, the people in Europe that had gone through those revolutions over there, and you had these countries or these cities that were ultra modern cities that then, because of the wars that took place there, were reduced to people living in these powerless apartment buildings and burning furniture on their patios to cook and stay warm. And there were just so many real world examples of what could happen here. And the thing that really surprised me the most was the normalcy bias that people in America had to think, well, that happens in other places, but it could never happen here. And, we've just been, Katrina and then Hurricane Helene. We've seen examples over and over again of, you're easily forgotten, when the news moves on. And, we've still got people in North Carolina who are roughing it. We've got people who can't get their vehicles out. We've got people who've lost their bridges that lead from the main road over to their house. And you've still got these people who will be affected for years to come. And it's easy that surprised me the most was the number of people who were like, yeah, but that could never happen here. The other thing that surprised me was how many people thought that if we lost power, it would be like a big block party and everybody would just be, pitching in together to help each other, and that it would all be peace and love, and there would be no theft, and there would be no violence, and there wouldn't be these lowlifes that came forward to start robbing and taking advantage of the situation. But, anybody who studied blackouts knows that people who are going to loot and rob do so quickly because they don't know how long that window of opportunity is going to be. So I think the thing that shocked me the most was just how oblivious Americans were to, we would be immune to the things that happen everywhere else.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I was doing some research when it comes to like starvation and stuff like that, and looking back on some of the stuff that the Chinese had went through, and the deprivation that was involved, and the things that they did, the things that they ate just to survive. It was amazing to me when reading these books. But it was so that just the depths that people will go, especially when you see your child is hungry, or and your neighbor might have a little look, and that's why I preach a lot in preparedness, that get to know your neighbors first of all, but you're most likely to be in trouble with your neighbor if you're flourishing and he's not. So just kind of have that mindset also, because like I said, whether they're friends or whether you're friends or not, whether you have each other over every Christmas, if his kid's starving, it's not going to matter to him.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too that I think people don't realize is the difference between a starvation level diet and the type of diet that you need to sustain a long walk if you think you're going to, get yourself from one location to another. Because as people who have backpacked and trekked through the woods, the calorie requirements to fuel a person carrying a 60-pound pack are a lot more than, you need to just sit in one place and chill out. And, you may be able to get by on eating eels and slugs and worms and all that and grasshoppers if you're not burning a lot of calories. But if you're going to be walking 60 miles with a pack, you're going to need more.
Yeah, I think some of our readers and friends learned that. We took them all on a hike, the exact path, the same path that some of my main characters did in the beginning of one of my books. We took that exact hike into Ocala National Forest, and it was a relatively short hike, 6 miles. We stayed out there for 3 days, but I think that was an eye opener for a lot of people, and it was a good learning experience for a lot of them. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I've read the comments because I know that there's one person in particular who's still complaining about that.
Yeah.
I saw her in the chat there earlier.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. Guys, just a quick reminder, if you have any questions you want directed right toward Franklin, just hit hashtag Mick and then write the question. Russ is in the background compiling all those. We'll bring him in here in a little bit, and then we'll get him to read those questions. That way we're able to pick his brain the best we can. Because, the guy's a busy man. He's writing 2, 3, 4 books a year. We can't keep him all night. So, look, with that being said, I know that audio has been a huge part of your success. I think you sold something like 475,000 downloads and audiobooks or something like that.
Yeah, we're almost at 600.
Wow. So see, I have old information. Good for you. Alongside with one of your favorite narrators, Kevin Pierce. Do you adapt your writing style to Kevin at all, or any narrator that you might have?
Yeah, what's interesting is my first exposure to Kevin Pierce was listening to Glenn Tate's 299 Days, which is an amazing series. And so when I released Borrowed World, it hadn't even been out like 3 days when Kevin shot me a message and said, "Hey, if you want to do audio, I'd love to talk to you about it." And I'm like, "Hey, that's the 299 Days guy." So I was already a fan. But then when I saw that he kind of knew, because anybody can read your words, but he seems to understand how to act out my characters.
Sure.
He seems to understand what I'm intending a person to act like. And so now when I write, I hear Kevin's voice in my head a lot. I'm like, how's he going to read this sentence? And sometimes I'll throw crazy names in there, like the Mad Mix mug, coffee makes me poop. I just picked that because I wanted to hear Kevin say coffee makes me poop.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What was it like the first time that you heard your books come to life through Audible? What was it? What was that experience? Was it just like not a big deal, or
I was blown away because I was a huge audio fan. I listened to audiobooks nonstop because, I mentioned that I had a background in construction. So I was building spec houses on the side. This was a crazy time in my life. I was working full time. I was writing Borrowed World on my lunch breaks, and I was building spec houses at night. So at night, I would be listening to audio while I was in these houses working by myself. So the first time I heard a produced audiobook that, they said, this is Audible and you have been listening to Franklin Horton, I was just blown away. Yeah,
it's a humbling experience, and we got about 600,000 down. Good for you. Yeah, that's amazing to have that kind of fan base. And have you had any, like, with that large of a fan base? Have you had any wild reader interactions where you say, "Well, that was kind of odd or weird," or "That was cool," or any of those stick out in your head?
Oh, there's a ton of them. I mean, the most interesting one that happened in the last year was there was this WWE wrestler superstar, Eva Marie, who was like huge wrestler, and she has 6 million fans on Instagram. I mean, and she was a superstar, and she became obsessed with the Borrowed World and Locker 9 and Mad Mick. And she started, the way I found out about this is she was on a podcast where she mentioned my books, and I saw this weird blip in sales. So then she did a reel on Instagram and tagged me in it and said, "These are the books I'm talking about." And she did several reels and videos over the coming weeks talking about my books. And I sent her a swag pack because she would jog every day in a weighted vest, and I sent her a Mad Mick patch to wear on it. So that was probably one of the most interesting. But there have been all kinds of people from weird special operations backgrounds or weird political backgrounds who I wouldn't necessarily think would read my books, but they have. And even though the Mad Mick is not a military character, he's kind of this just, rogue assassin type character. He has a huge special operations following. And it's amazing how many people I hear from that community who just love the Mad Mick and say, this guy's our patron saint.
Well, and you had an interaction. We won't mention any names, but you had an interaction where you had just met somebody here, I would guess, within the last year or so, and come to find out that he had read your books and actually, if I'm speaking, tell me. But he had had his team read some of the books. Do you recall that story?
Yeah, that's how I have interacted with this guy on Facebook and through email for about 8 years now, and he had sent me feedback on my books, and we'd talked several times, but I hadn't met him in person until the last year or so. And I asked him how he had found my books, and that's how he said he had found them, was in they'd read them at Bragg in this as an assignment in this one team. And
well, that's cool.
Yeah, and the story was that whoever had given them this assignment wanted them to read how an untrained mind dealt with a particular situation, because he said, "You guys are trained minds, you do everything as trained minds do them." This is an untrained mind taking on a particular situation, and I want you to look at it from the perspective of an untrained mind.
That is interesting. It's pretty wild. What about, especially early on in your career? What about have you had any like super humbling experiences where you were just kind of blown away by, maybe somebody had said, reading your books changed my life. Now I'm preparing, or anything like that sticks out.
Oh yeah, there have been several, and one that was really kind of powerful to me that's happened here in the last couple of weeks is this lady who reached out, and she said, my dad just passed away from cancer, and she said he had a horrible ordeal with it, and his treatments were extremely painful, and he listened to the Mad Mick throughout, and it was crazy that we would be driving back and forth, and he would be sick and he would be suffering, and Barb would do something and he would start laughing about it, and he would be sitting there with his earbuds in while he was taking his chemo, and he'd be chuckling, and he said, when I pass away, would you let him know how much I enjoyed his books?
Wow.
And she sent me this message a couple of weeks ago, and she said, I just wanted to tell you, he really wanted you to know that they were the bright spot at the end. They
Wow.
really helped him cope. And, what do you say to that?
Yeah, there's nothing. That's amazing. That's an
Yeah.
amazing story. Very cool. What about any interesting gifts you might have received from readers? Anything that sticks out that like out of the blue, would you just receive a odd kind of gift from any readers or anything?
Well, I get lots of liquor, and I'm cool with that. People can send liquor. I got a $200 bottle of scotch here for the last Mad Mick book, which is funny. But I did get a Mad Mick themed Glock, which was pretty cool. Custom engraved, Cerakoted, everything, and that was pretty cool. And I've got several Mad Mick themed knives.
Wow.
Yeah, so a lot of little things, but the Glock. And a Mad Mick watch. A watchmaker made me a Mad Mick watch. That was cool.
Wow, that is awesome. Hey, my fans, if you're over there in the chat, you got to step up your game a little bit. Kick this thing up a notch here. So we know about what's going on. We know about your past and stuff like that, but I'm really kind of concerned, and I'd like to get your input on this. Let's talk about the future of independent publishing, and particularly in the independent author space within like the next 5 years, especially with this emergence of AI. Where do you see this? Is it helping us? Is it going to hurt us? Where do you see this going with the emergence of AI and the indie authors?
Well, when I first started out, it was a lot easier to get visibility as an author and to get eyes on your book. And, that's your marketing. That's what you need is people looking at your books. And the more books come on Amazon, the more books that are launched, that's that much more noise you have to fight your way through to get people to see your book, not just buy it, but to see it in the sea of titles that are out
Right.
there. So that is one of the big struggles is as AI increases the number of books out there, and I'm not talking about entirely AI generated books, but I'm talking about like authors who will write an outline and then use AI to produce the book in a matter of a couple of weeks.
Right.
There are some people that are saying they can do it in a couple of days. Yeah, and I know they can, but there are still people who are producing reasonable quality books at a much faster pace using AI, and that creates more noise. Everything that I'm reading says the way that we combat that is by placing value on authenticity. Things like your podcast, things like doing Instagram reels, things where people see you and they understand you as a person and they know you're real and you interact with them. Because, I try and it's not always easy, but I try to answer every single message I get because my opinion has always been that you win readers one at a time. It's my relationship with you as a reader that allows you to see that I'm a real person. So if you send me a message, I'm going to try my best to answer you. So I think that's how we fight through, because there will be more noise. There will be more books out there, and it's going to get tougher and tougher to fight our way through all that, seaweed of crappy books. But we just have to do it by trying to be authentic and to do things like this that let people see we're real.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you had mentioned that you answer everyone's messages, because I'm a firm believer, especially at going to these reader expos or these writer expos, and especially when we have our merchandise out. I want to shake everybody's hand that spends $1 with me. I want to be there. I take some flack from my wife for not going and taking classes, or Russ gives me a hard time for not taking classes. But I feel like it's an obligation that, look, I want to shake this person's hand, because look, they're spending their hard-earned money on my silly stuff, and I want to show them that I really appreciate that, right? So I like that mindset. I
And
really
it's
do.
not just their money, but it's their time.
Sure.
Time is valuable too, and they've committed their time to read my book or listen to my book. And if they can give me some of their time, I'm going to give them some of my time back.
Absolutely. It just seems like the right thing to do. All right, let's see. I think Russ has some questions. Russ, I'm going to bring you in. I think some of the viewers have some questions. Let's bring in Russ here. Let's get Franklin over here. Boom. There you go. Russ, what do you got? So, everybody, first of all, welcome, Russ. It's painful, Franklin. It's painful.
It is.
Go ahead. What do you got?
Okay, so we're going to start from the top for the most the person who put it in first, and this was Guy Williams. Franklin, you know Guy.
Yes.
There's hashtag Mick. Are there more Mad Mick books in the future?
Oh, definitely. One of the reasons that I wrote this Way of Dan book and just released it is I wanted to wrap that series up so I could spend the rest of the year focusing on the Mad Mick and the Borrowed World. So I've got a Borrowed World that I'm about halfway through now, and I'll be writing a Mad Mick after that. Then I'm going to write the second, the follow-up to the Willie book that I released last year. So definitely more Mad Mick and Borrowed World coming.
Okay, and that actually answered Amy Jennings' question, which was, what is the release schedule order for the rest of the year? So thank you for that.
That's it, Amy.
There you go, Amy. Now you know. Okay, so Diana Koala 95, she goes, every time this is a comment, she goes, every time I see Franklin Horton on a book, my mind automatically reads it as Horton Hears a Who. Dumb brain.
Sorry.
Yeah, it is what it is. Now it's stuck in my head. And there were quite a few comments over on Kick about that. Somebody's like, Horton Hears a what? And then, was that a Seuss book? So let's see here. Okay, next one is by Jeff Johnson. And I'm going to
Hey, Jeff.
Are Jim and Connor going to cross paths again?
Absolutely not. The reason for that is because I had this assumption in my head that most of my readers have read my books as they come out. So they were all caught up. And when Mad Mick and Jim met, they understood that. They knew who these people were. The problem is the Borrowed World is still selling like crazy 10 years later. And so there are people that read book 8 and then they go on to read book 9 and they don't understand who this Mad Mick character is who appeared in between those books. They've missed that whole connection. So crossovers complicate things for new readers. So I will not do any more of them.
Okay.
That's good to know. That is really good to know.
Yeah. So here we go. On to the next one. Let's see here. Pete, if you'll unstar those as we go.
Yep.
Okay, Will Gomez asks, Mick, has Angry American influenced your writing?
Oh, I read Chris's books long before I ever met Chris. And I was a total fangirl when I met him the first time because, yeah, his books were a huge influence. And Joe Nobody, who was another prepper author at the time, and I read their books, enjoyed them. G. Michael Hopp's books. So yeah, I was a big fan when I met Chris the first time at Heritage Life Skills. He and I were set up at a table selling together.
Yep. And that's actually where I met you the first time, was one of the times up there at Heritage Life Skills. You and Chris were side by side.
Oh yeah.
So Eden Army #1, who doesn't follow instructions, just so you know. How did your wife react when y'all are meeting, when you're meeting fans? I imagine it's a bit surreal.
Well, what's funny is when I first wrote The Borrowed World, I'm like, it's about a guy who thinks like me. And my wife's like, I don't know about that. I don't know that there's that many people out there who think like you. Well, what we found out now is that there is actually a whole world of us who kind of think similarly. But it doesn't shock my wife as much as my daughter. My daughter still rolls her eyes at the whole thing. She's like, oh, you have people read your books? I get a lot of eye rolls because she just has a hard time accepting that they're fans of these books.
I think she'd get along well with my daughter then, because I think she's the same way.
Oh, yeah. Daughters keep you humble.
Not kidding.
Okay. So the Reverend Finch asks, who's more popular, Mad Mick or Jim and Company?
You know, I think even though Jim is more relatable, Mad Mick he's probably pushing a little bit ahead there. Those Mad Mick books have stayed, Borrowed World kind of fluctuates in popularity. It is always sold consistently, but for some reason, if you go to Audible, to the military thrillers category, there have been anywhere from 6 to 9 Mad Mick books in the top 50 for almost a year and a half now.
Wow.
The Mad Mick dominates that category, with the exception of like Tom Clancy and a few other people like the Andrews and Wilson writing team. So Mad Mick, he's got people who love him.
And I feel like a lot of that is the way Kevin portrayed those characters in that book too. He did such a great job, especially in the Audible. I mean, obviously on the Audible side, he did just a great job. Where at first I was. And here's my thing when I was interviewing my narrators. You have readers, and then you have narrators that can actually act out your book, right? And Kevin's he's the master at it, I guess. So there you go.
Yeah, Kevin says, if when you talk to him about this, he says that because he came out of a radio background, and I don't know if you and Kevin had a chance to talk about this, Pete, but his first venture outside of radio was doing training videos for firemen.
Yeah, I was going to mention that because you had about the first time you had heard Kevin's voice, and I was thinking to myself, no, he did some. I remember now. I didn't know it until he had told me, but sure enough, he did training videos that we'd have on VHS things at the fire department, and you'd see Kevin Pierce there, his name in the titles. That was kind of funny.
Oh yeah, but he says that he didn't realize when he first started doing audiobooks the level of acting that you needed to bring to the table. But yeah, putting himself in those characters, I mean, he's not Irish, but he brings the Mad Mick in a way that is very relatable to people, because you can listen to that character and understand that this is a guy who had the skills, but he's right on the cusp that now he's not as much of a badass as he still thinks he is. He's still got it, but he's getting older, and at the same time he's got this daughter who's like, Dad, you're just not what you think you are.
Right. Like our daughters, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Okay.
Ahead,
So Terry Arndt says, did you go to the Soldier of Fortune convention when it was in Charlotte back in the 70s?
No, but I sure wish I had. I was too young, and my mom was not a fan of Soldier of Fortune magazine, as most moms were not.
I agree.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm really jealous that I missed that, because I follow R.K. Brown on Facebook, and I've read his memoirs, and he talks a lot about the sheer craziness that went on at those conventions, and I'm really sorry I missed it.
So Christy again, she's another comment. She hopes you'll go with me to Troy's Gate this mountain readiness. And you need to make time for that, brother.
Yes, I do.
It is really an eye-opening experience.
It is. It really is. Guy comes up with a question. He says, how'd you come up with the Mad Mick character? Is it based on anybody you know?
Oh yeah, it was inspired by a guy that I know who he does not have the assassin background of the Mad Mick, but the story of coming over from Ireland as a kid is his story.
Gotcha.
And so that kind of inspired the character, and then he just went on and became more of a badass. But it was based on a guy whose family got in a little trouble in Ireland. His mother brought him over here to kind of keep him out of trouble, and he still managed to find trouble when he got here.
Perfect. What do you got next, Russ?
Well, first is a comment. Terry just responded back just to make you jealous there, Franklin. She went and she says it was great.
Well, thanks a lot.
Pissed Off Arborist, also known as Mike from FIB Preparedness. It just depends on who he logs in on. He says, what is your one preparedness item that you must have?
A knife. Never leave the house without a knife. If I'm going from my house to my shop, I still have to make sure I have a knife. You just don't go out of the house without a knife. Probably the second one is carrying a flashlight, a tiny flashlight in your pocket. It's one of those things that you don't realize how much you'll use it until you have it, and then you use it all the damn time.
Exactly. And
Perfect.
folks, I'm going to do a quick PSA there, Pete. In 2 weeks, folks, 2 weeks, FIB Preparedness will be our guest here on the Eden Army podcast. And now back to our regularly scheduled program.
That's news to me. I'm going to come up with a whole bunch of questions for him. That's going to be
Absolutely. It's going to be a good one. So, Egghead Warrior, he's out in California, unfortunately. But he wants to know if there are any more Locker 9 books in the future. He has a daughter that's going to be in high school. I believe she's in high school, and she's going to be heading out to college here in the hopefully near future.
There will not be any more Locker 9 books per se. And the reason for that is because somebody told me early on that there's a lot of readers out there who don't like to read a series until it's done. They don't want to be hanging out there waiting on the next book. So I decided I would write a shorter series that was going to be a certain number of books, and then I would close it. But so many people have asked about those characters that what I've done is I introduced the new series, Defeated Creek, last year, and the first book was called Willie. And that takes place in the same community as Locker 9. And those characters are going to interface with the Locker 9 people. So we'll get an update on the Locker 9 community, but through a different set of eyes.
I didn't pick up on that. That's good.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Mike has just responded that he guess he's giving away a knife in honor of Mr. Horton in 2 weeks.
Cool.
There you go.
Very cool.
There you have it.
Getting sticky things.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see here. Okay, Diana again. What do you feel is the most important? Okay, you go ahead, Pete. What's the most important thing to do in planning? And I'm assuming planning in regards to preparedness.
I think that it's impossible to plan for any situation because there are so many things that can happen that are just beyond our ability to comprehend them. So I think the thing is that and I don't know if you call this a plan or not, but is to have the mindset that you should be prepared for things that anything can happen. So it's more a mindset than a plan. But I think having this mindset of preparedness and possibility, and that good things can happen at any time, but bad things can also happen at any time, so that you're just prepared to accept, adapt, and deal with what happens.
Okay. Well, and I'm going to throw a question of my own in real quick before we get to that one. So back when I met you at Heritage Life Skills, I also took a class from you, and it was in regards to the binder that is explained in Locker 9. are we going to see a remix of the binder class at any point in time at Mountain Readiness?
Well, actually, I have quit doing classes because I never enjoyed doing classes. There are so many people that do that better than I. There are people like Nick Meacher out there who are just so good at structuring information and presenting information and teaching information. And for me, it was always a seat of my pants thing. I was just never good at getting up there. That's why I write, because I'm not good at presenting information through talking. So I'm just going to leave it to the experts who are better teachers than I.
That's interesting. The binder thing was interesting because I did a interview one time, and I had mentioned that I left instructions for my wife. The main character left instructions for his wife back at the house. And one of the interview questions were did you get that from Frank? Did you go to his class in Heritage Life Skills? First of all, I didn't know what Heritage Life Skills was, and I hadn't gotten into Franklin's stuff yet. And I go, no. I go, he has it in his books. He goes, yeah. I go, well, it just seemed like common sense to me. If you're going to be away, you got to kind of keep your, he goes, no, you need to read this series. And it's all, I was like, oh, outstanding. That's how I got into reading.
Well, see,
stuff,
and for me, that came out of my commercial maintenance background of, when I built a building for an occupant, we hand over an operations manual on how you operate the building. What heat pump filters do you have to have? Where are the shutoffs? All this. So that made me think, oh, then I need to, do one of these for home because I'm gone a lot, and people at home need to know where the shutoffs are.
Absolutely. Reverend Finch wants to know, is there any news on the Ty Stone series?
Those books are on hold for now because they don't sell as well as Mad Mick. But they take just as long to write. So the
Sure.
thing is, if I'm going to spend 3 or 4 months writing a book, I want it to be the most successful book it can be.
Absolutely. And Guy wants to know something about Mad Mick Sweet Tea insulated thermal cups. Are you having them at Mountain Readiness?
Yes, I will.
Very good. All right, very good. I think you're pretty much, you always go to this thing down here in St. Petersburg for the most part, right?
Yeah. Now the meetup that we used to have for the post-apocalyptic author meetup was something Boyd Craven always organized. So, I don't know if he's still organizing that or not, but that was the event that we all used to meet up at.
Yeah, that's where I ambushed everybody at because I had just released that book. I was getting ready to release that book, and I was kind of conversing a little bit with Boyd. And I'm like, I told my wife, I go, look, I'm driving to this thing. I don't know what the hell they're going to think I'm a stalker, but I'm going to go and just corner these guys. I'm going to pick their brains and see if this is worth it or not. And she's like, whatever, go ahead. And 4 books in, I guess it was worth it.
Yeah. That's what I said when I was dragging you to Vegas. I said, it'll change your life.
Absolutely. It is good. Franklin, where can your fans come to see you? And once they buy this new book, where can they get it signed at? What's your next event?
Okay. The next event, local people can see me at Buchanan County's library next month. But other than that, the Mountain Readiness event there, first week of May, going to be there selling books, signing books, shaking babies' hands, all that stuff, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll have all the merch there to sell. So.
Yeah, so I strategically placed myself in that position. So everybody has to go by me to get the Angry American and Franklin Horton stuff. So I can try to use my salesperson skills to get a couple sales before they reach the big time guys. So.
He's trying to get all the money before they get to me. They're like, I'm sorry, Pete took all my money.
Exactly. So very cool. Mr. Horton, thank you very much for being here tonight. We appreciate you, sir. I know I told you it'd be really short. Sorry it went so long.
Oh, that's all right. Had a good time hanging out with you guys. It's always a pleasure.
Perfect. We will see you at Mountain Readiness. And guys, as soon as we run this Mountain Readiness commercial, me and Russ are going to come back. We're going to go over your prep of the week. I want to hear what you prepped this week. But without saying anything else, thank you very much, Franklin. We appreciate you, brother.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
There you go. Move with purpose. What do you think, Franklin Horton? We're making it big time here.
Oh yeah, big time. And Franklin is just such a genuine guy. And whether he's like most people, he downplays how well he does instruct. I learned so much from that class, but I do understand, and I agree. Nick does do a good job. So we talked about what'd you do? I mean, you did. We both did different things this weekend, and both had a good time.
Yep.
And I guess that would be considered our prep of the week.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about that. But for those of you guys that are watching us on different platforms, just a quick heads up. My name again, if you joined us late, I am Pete Robertucci. I scribbled a few books, right? I got to meet all these cool guys. So make sure you like and subscribe and all that stuff. And for the love of God, buy a book or two. That'd be kind of sweet. That'd get my wife off of my back for a little while, which is highly unlikely. But we appreciate you tuning in. Yeah, Russ, what I did is I hung out with a group that you had met while you were down here.
Yeah.
And this was their first real kind of group get together, bush skills. He had a whole bunch of drills for us to do, and I was there mostly to observe, and I took part in some of the drills. But I spent the entire weekend out there. It was cold down here in Florida too, but they primitive camped. I brought the rolling coffin, so I was nice and warm. But no, we spent the entire weekend out there, learned some cool things. We dug a Dakota hole for the first time. I'd seen them on YouTube. I've done all that, but we actually cooked on it. But one of the best aspects that one of the best things I took out of that was we all had, some of us had thermal imagers and night vision goggles, and we wanted to see what the limitations for these were. So what would get in the way of thermal? What would get in the way of your night vision? So in case the bad guy had that information, we'd know, look, that might be a blind spot in our preps, but also for us, right? If we needed to hide from something like that. So that was my biggest take out of that whole get together. What about you?
Well, Teresa and I went up to Dixon Landing, North Carolina. A great little campground that is under construction, but the owners, Steve and Joan, are just tremendous people. They have a vision, and I think it's going to be great. But we were invited up there by Julie and Roy Dorn, and most of the folks over in Kick know them. And it was just a little meet and greet for their preparedness community that they have. And they do Zello check-ins on Tuesday and Saturdays, and also with a Facebook Live every now and then. But they had a couple of classes on Saturday. And they also had Dean Phillips, who lives up near, help me out here, where Stephen Johnson's at, Burnsville. And he lives up above her, and he talked about his experiences during Hurricane Helene. Was out without power for 23 days. His wife was not at home when it happened. She was visiting kids, and how they worked to clear the roads to be able for her to get back to him. And then, of course, they had to go from trying to survive mode to trying to help Roy survive mode when they had to rush Roy to the hospital for a medical issue. But they did classes on like knot tying and primitive shelter building. And then they also did some cast iron cooking, which is something that I've always liked to have to do, and I've done, but at true cast iron cooking where you put the coals on the top and you got to monitor the coals on the bottom, I've never really done that. So that was extremely interesting for me, and they made some wonderful desserts out of these cast irons. And I'll talk to you, they used a galvanized trash can that he had rigged, and it's kind of hard to explain. I'll have to sit down and collect my thoughts on how to explain. Thank you, darling. And but they were able to put 3 cast iron Dutch ovens in this thing and cook 3 cakes at the same time, and they were absolutely tremendous.
Yeah, I think didn't Nick Meacher do something like that? One Mountain Readiness. He made a cherry cobbler or
Yeah,
something.
cherry cobbler or something like that. But
Very cool.
this Miss Joan, she took, and this was by far for me the dessert of the weekend. She took an orange and she opened it up, scraped out all of the orange out of the inside, leaving just the peel. Then she poured brownie mix in it, wrapped it up in tinfoil, threw it in the fire.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
It was tremendous. It was like a lava cake, had the orange flavoring, and if you ever seen those chocolates you can get at Christmas time where you
Yeah.
smash it and it opens up and it tastes like orange,
Yeah.
that's what this tasted like. It was absolutely glorious. I was able to make my very first contact on HF with Roy's HF rig. I did it on 10 meter, which means I was legal, folks.
Mm-hmm.
I made my first HF contact, which has got me more into ham, that I want to go out and buy me an HF rig. But it was just a very good, relaxing weekend with some great like-minded people, which just drives home the need, as we always say on this podcast and all the other ones, the need for community.
Yeah. Find that tribe, right?
Find that tribe. And
Terry, I need to get you over here to talk to baby girl because she did some seedlings and didn't quite do so well. So I need to get you to teach her some planting and replanting stuff. But yeah, you're right, Russ. And look, how many times we can't stress it enough. This is why I meet so many of the groups that I meet. This is why I do kind of the things that I do, especially in the local area, because you never know what's going to happen and where you're going to be when you need when the shit hits the fan, right?
And as a matter of fact, here's Dino right there, Mr. Dean Phillips, in the house. Happy anniversary to Dean and Stephanie. Their anniversary was on Tuesday, and they ended up having a candlelight dinner because they lost power. But they were prepared for it. So, so we've got several people in the chat saying what they've done this week, but we've also got a lot of people that aren't responding. Folks, you need to be prepping at least one item a week, guys.
Absolutely. Now more than ever. Guy showed up at the FTX, and then Christy started her new sourdough. That's awesome. Very cool. Guys, we got also, I forgot, we got, other than the ATF is gay shirts, we got some new swag that we're going to be bringing out to Mountain Readiness. Now these cool little nuggets.
Nice little.
I haven't decided if I'm just going to give these out for class. I don't know. I haven't decided what we're going to do with these or if we're going to put them on the table yet. I'm up in the air about that, but kind of cool. And then we finally, Russ, after you pulled my ear and twisted my arm, we finally got the Velcro patches.
2x4.
Yeah, we got those ordered, and they should be here in time for Mountain Readiness. So that's kind of cool.
I have seen the artist proof. I'm looking forward to seeing the actual patch. I think it's going to people are going to like that. I think they really will, and it's going to be a little flashlight for my younger son.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he'll EDC it. Very good. I think the patch will be a big hit. I really do.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, guys, if go check out Pete's swag on his website. He's trying to up his game.
Yeah,
And,
I'm spending money.
I'm going to try to talk him into making sure that maybe we'll have some different hats at Mountain Readiness, but we'll have to talk a little more on that, and I'll have to get out the jaws of life to get into his wallet. Y'all know how it is.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah.
Russ, I tell you, let's do this. Let's you give us some parting words of advice, and then when I come back in, I want to share one more tidbit of information of the thing I learned and the thing that I think is going to be crucial to preparedness on the backside. So give us your nugget of information, closing argument, sir.
Guys, this weekend really reinforced for me the need for community. Being able to just break bread and spend time talking to like-minded people that care about where this world is going is beyond measure. So remember, you have a birth date, you have an end date. Always, let's just worry about the dash and keep talking to folks in your community. That's all I got, Pete.
I appreciate you, Russ. So you just one more thing, guys. I wanted to add one more thing. I think that is important. One thing I learned this weekend when hanging out with a bunch of like-minded guys, not only like-minded guys from a preparedness standpoint, but also like-minded guys from a spiritual standpoint. Right? Once you get done buying all of Horton's books, all my swag and stuff like that, I was introduced to a book, nonfiction, of course. It's called the Omega Dynamics from a cat named, I don't know this guy, from Adam. Jamie Walden. I got this in yesterday about 5 o'clock, and I'm halfway through it. So if you're in the same spiritual mindset that I am, I would tell you that book, Omega Dynamics by Jamie Walden, is a game changer. It takes away your trepidation about preparedness, takes away your trepidation about some of the things you might have to do or encounter during a shit hit the fan scenario. So read that book. It's been a real eye-opener for me. And guys, look, at the end of the day, be safe. If you can't be safe, be dangerous. Love you.
Thanks for watching the Eden Army podcast. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And remember, be safe. If you can't be safe, be dangerous.